Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching Focal Length, the show that brings you the most pressing issues shaping global dynamics and politics. The Netherlands is at a political and diplomatic crossroads as it grapples with growing domestic and global pressures. From supporting Ukraine amid rising energy costs to navigating tensions over Iran's nuclear programme, Dutch policymakers face tough choices. Large protests over the Gaza conflict have raised security and diplomatic challenges. The country also faces scrutiny over defence spending as NATO expectations rise. With President Donald Trump threatening new trade tariffs, Dutch exports could take a hit and the recent collapse of the Dutch government adds more uncertainty ahead of crucial national elections. As voters head to the polls, the outcome could reshape the Netherlands' role in Europe and beyond. To discuss this, we are joined by Sander van Hoorn, former EU correspondent, live from Brussels, Belgium. Sander is a seasoned journalist with years of experience covering European politics and diplomacy and has been a prominent analyst of EU affairs on international news platforms. So, Sander, to start off with, how is the Netherlands balancing its support for Ukraine with high energy costs and public fatigue? And do the Dutch voters still back military and financial support for Kyiv?
So far, the Dutch public and Dutch parliament have supported, broadly, support for Ukraine because the sentiment is really that Ukraine is fighting a war that might otherwise come to us through, for example, Poland or the Baltic states, which are members of NATO. So if we don't stop Russia now, is a broad sentiment, then we might face a situation where we do have to aid NATO members in defending against Russia. So, of course, we have had rising energy costs, although that effect has waned down a little bit. We have seen war fatigue. We have seen large numbers of Ukrainian refugees coming to Holland, but still support for military aid to Ukraine is high in the Netherlands.
Away from Europe and with tensions rising over Iran's nuclear programme, what role can the Netherlands play in the EU's diplomacy, and how worried are Dutch policymakers about potential escalation?
They were worried, of course, about the escalation with Iran because especially when it comes to Israel, the stance of Dutch politicians, like across the spectrum, is that negotiations should be tried before anything else. And also with Iran, you have seen when the nuclear deal was reached in 2015 that the Dutch government played an active part in the negotiations between the European countries, Russia and China, and Iran. And I think we still think that is the way. I think most of Dutch politicians did not prefer the military option to be played out. However, no one really spoke bad about it because it is Israel, and Israel has a special status in Dutch politics, still has. So that's why I think the majority of Dutch parliament and especially the Dutch government was glad that the war, the 12-day war, was over. And they hope that negotiations will take place and that the matter can be resolved in a peaceful way from now on.
Staying in the Middle East now, and the Gaza conflict has sparked big protests in Dutch cities. So how is the Netherlands managing public opinion, security concerns, and also its stance towards Israel and Palestine?
The Dutch society has become highly polarized over the Gaza war, where you see that more and more people in Holland, the population, think that the war should end, that Israel, although it has the right to defend itself and reacted necessarily to the attacks on October 7, 2023, the proportionality has really gone. And there the Dutch population differs with Dutch politics, which is very much more pro-Israel. You see it, of course, in the far-right populist Freedom Party, but also the more mainstream parties joining the Dutch coalition government. They think that Israel's right to exist is and the right of defending itself is paramount, including the atrocities that we see now in Gaza. So there's a big difference between public sentiment, I think, and the Dutch politics. And you see it in the polarization. Just a small example of what happened recently. A Dutch singer was supposed to perform at a Jewish youth football tournament, and there was like basically people advertising Zionist youth movements. And he was really offended by the word Zionism at a concert that he was giving. So he dropped out of the concert. He walked away. And politics was all over him. Right-wing politics saying this is anti-Semitism, left-wing politics defending this singer. So you see, small things can really escalate fast in Holland because there's a big difference between the two sides. The one side supporting Israel no matter what, and the other side denouncing Israel no matter what.
Moving on now, the Netherlands has faced criticism for falling short on NATO spending, but has the Ukraine war really changed Dutch attitudes towards bigger defence budgets?
It has, really. And the funny thing is that the current Secretary General of NATO is, of course, Mark Rutte, who has been the Prime Minister of the Netherlands for over a decade. So the underspending of the Netherlands was under his rule. That makes it a little bit more interesting. But on average, you see that across the board in Dutch politics and among the population, there is a they see the need for rising defense expenditures. And that is indeed because of the war in Ukraine. It is indeed because of the way that people in the Netherlands just don't trust Russia to stop at a certain point. Of course, the Baltic states and Poland, Romania, Hungary, they are members of the EU, they are members of NATO, and they tell us that they lived through Russian occupation. And they tell us that when Vladimir Putin is saying that wherever a Russian soldier has walked, that is part of Russia, that they feel threatened by that. And we feel that threat with them in general, I think. And that is why they're under the Russian threat, whether it's real or perceived, the average Dutch person, at least in politics, feels the need to defend against that, including, however difficult it may be, spending more on defense.
Looking at world economics now, and President Trump is continuing to threaten new tariffs. How exposed is the Dutch export economy to fresh transatlantic trade disputes and stalled EU trade talks?
Among the European economies, I think the Dutch economy is very exposed to tariffs. That's why the Dutch government way back joined the first stages of the European Union in the first place, because we know that removing trade barriers hugely benefits the Dutch economy. And we are exposed as a trading nation. Look at the port of Rotterdam, for example, one of the biggest ports, also ships from India arriving here with goods, not only for the Netherlands, but also like in transit to other European countries. So we are exposed. We have a high quality steel mill here, Tata Steel, Indian company, by the way, that is producing high quality steel that is used, for example, in American cars, American industry. So tariffs on Dutch steel going to America will have an immediate effect on Dutch economy. So that's why we are pushing, the Dutch government is pushing behind the scenes on the European Commission to close a deal with at least tariff friction as possible.
I want to move now to domestic politics, and the recent fall of the Dutch government adds uncertainty. So what were the key factors behind it, and how is this going to affect the Netherlands' role in EU policy?
The Dutch government fell over disagreement over migration politics. The far-right populist Freedom Party is really gaining on issues relating to migration and the wish to be more strict about who is allowed into the Netherlands and who's not. They, for example, want to have border controls on the Dutch borders, even with other European countries. And they felt that they didn't get enough support of other members of the coalition government. So they withdrew their support because they think they can gain in the next election of the Freedom Party wants to be the new prime minister after the elections. Now, the effect on the Dutch position in EU politics is there, of course. I mean, it is a government that is not fully in business because there's new elections coming up. However, in this community of nations, which is the European Union, there's always an incumbent government. There's always a government that is facing no confidence vote at home. So they are used to just working with the government they have until there is a new government after elections. It's just the way it works. And they look at other factors as well, which is, for example, the size of the country, the size of the economy. And those are things that do not change after the fall of a cabinet or waiting until new elections. So I don't think that you should overestimate the effect of the fall of the Dutch government in EU politics.
And with the Dutch elections approaching, what issues will decide the vote, and how might the results reshape the Netherlands' place in Europe and its global approach?
Of course, the Dutch elections will only be held in October, so there's still a long way to go. And you will see parties trying to frame what the elections are about. The far-right Freedom Party of Geert Wilders will try to make the elections about migration because that is their subject. And they know that if that is the subject that is being talked about, they will gain. And that's why other parties will want to move away from that subject, move it, for example, to the climate change or to the threat of Russia and the need for European security, because they know that the Freedom Party of Geert Wilders really does not have an answer to those questions. So the frame, the subjects that are being talked about will in a large part decide the outcome of the elections. So whether the Freedom Party will gain or the Liberal Party or the Social Democratic Party, I mean, it's all up for grabs. They are basically tied in a neck-on-neck race, but a lot can happen in those 5 months that await until the Dutch elections are being held.
Well, I want to thank Sander van Hoorn for joining us and providing insight on this episode of Focal Length. And with that, it's a wrap on the episode. For more global news, make sure to stay tuned on NewsX World.